Okay, you guys, the next thing that I'm doing now, if you haven't watched the other video that I posted, please make sure you do that. That's going over completing the square and quadratic formula, which is going to be necessary for this project. Or you can kind of stop in the middle of this and then kind of go and watch it while, and then come back to the project. But here is what you're working on. This is an example of the project. This is not the exact same one. So the only thing that's different though is my equation. So here is the equation that's been given. So let's go ahead and see what's going on. It says Jason dove off a cliff into the ocean in Acapulco while vacationing with some friends. His height as a function of time could be modeled by the function, and then it has an equation, where t is the time in seconds and h is the height in feet. Using the information, when does Jason hit the water? Okay, so if we look here on the right, there's also a picture that represents kind of the flow of what this person is doing, what Jason is doing. So here is a little bit of a parabola. So you'll notice that it's just a piece of the parabola because he's starting off on the cliff and then he's going to jump up a little bit and then he'll fall to the water. Okay, so if this is already our equation, now t, and so just kind of if you want to take the place of t, it says here t is time and h is height. You can always go ahead and change that to x and y if you want to, but for our purposes of graphing, we could kind of keep it the same. So a is -1. I'm looking here, a is -1. B is 2, and C is 8. So that's the first one. And the next one says if it opens up or down. So we talked about that during our meeting. And because A is negative, this means that it's going to open down. And we know that because the A value is negative, or you can write the word negative. Okay. All right. So it says, what is the equation of the axis of symmetry? So I do not want this. I want the actual equation of if I were to graph, where is going to be my dotted line? Because eventually we're going to have to graph. Okay, so x equals opposite of b. So this is 2. So opposite of b is -2 over 2 times a, which is -1. Okay, so if I simplify that, -2 divided by a -2 becomes a +1. This is what I want. Okay. All right, so that means that my axis of symmetry, when I'm graphing, so I could go down here and I could say, okay, I'm going to have a dashed line at +1. So I'm going to go here at +1. I know this is 1 right here. I should have started there so you guys can see that that's going to be the middle of my parabola. Okay, so my parabola is going to go somewhere around here. Don't really know where yet, but once we figure out a vertex, that's going to help us out a little bit. Okay, so remember that our vertex is the x comma y point. So we're going to have a point here. It's going to be our maximum point. And actually, did that ask a question? Oh, I think that's going to be the next one. So I know the vertex is going to be the max point because it's the highest point of the parabola. So let's go ahead and plug that in. Here's my equation. For x and y purposes, I'm going to go ahead and change it to y equals negative parentheses squared plus 2 parentheses plus 8. Okay, and then I'm going to plug in using a different color. I'm going to plug in that 1 here and here. So we end up with, let's see here, y equals 1 squared is 1 times a negative, so that's -1 plus 2 plus 8. So I know that that's 10, so 10 minus 1 gives me 9. So my vertex is 1, 9. So now I'm going to go back to my graph. Here is my 1. Now I'm going to go up to 9. There is my vertex. Okay. So the next thing asks for your y-intercept. Your y-intercept is always going to be 0, c. So if I look at my equation, 0c, we have c as an 8. So it'd be 0, 8. Okay. So now I'm going to go ahead and graph that down on my graph. So 0, 0, 8, so 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. And what's nice about the y-intercept is that we can now figure out another point on this graph. So I'm going to go over and I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to the axis of symmetry. And I'm going to go over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and plot another point, because as we know, the axis of symmetry cuts the parabola in half equally. So now we've got 2 points on our graph, okay? Now the next question says, what does this represent? Well, if I think of this line being like the cliff, right now, so far, we see this rotation going this way, okay? This is always the starting point. So it represents basically like the height of the diver or jumper. I don't know if they dove or if they jumped. Okay, so a height of the diver really at 0 seconds, like when they start. Okay, you can write that however you'd like. You don't have to do the exact same thing, but that's the starting point. That's the starting point of this diver or jumper. They're going to jump up and then they're going to swing down and they're going to hit somewhere. So if we think of this here as the water. And our question is, when are they going to hit the water? Okay. So the next question is asking about discriminant. And the discriminant comes from the quadratic formula. So I'm going to move aside for a second and refresh your memory about the quadratic formula. So remember, we have a fun little song. So x equals opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Of course, I had to sing for you guys. So this is the discriminant. The discriminant is going to tell us like what type of solutions are we going to have. It's just like a preview of what will come. Okay, and so if that is a positive number, then we're going to get 2 solutions. And if that's a negative number, we're going to get no real solutions. No real solutions. And then if it's a 0, that means we're going to get 1 solution. Okay, so all we have to do then is we have to plug in our equation. So because I don't have very much space on my paper, I'm going to go ahead and put it right here. So I'm going to use this. Here's my equation. So opposite of b is -2, and actually I don't really care about this part right now. I'll just focus on the b squared. So b is 2 squared minus 4, because that's in the equation. A is -1, and c is 8. So let's see what that number is. So 2 squared is 4. A negative times a negative is a positive. We're going to add, or excuse me, multiply all of these numbers together to get 32. So my discriminant is 36 for my problem. Okay, so I'm going to put that right here. My discriminant is 36. What does that tell me based on my graph? Like what would I expect to see on my graph? That means that there are 2 solutions because that is a positive number. If that were a -36, I would say there's no solution. If that were 0, that would mean it would just hit the graph once on your x-axis. So for here, I would say, meaning there are 2 x-intercepts for this parabola. Will there be an x-intercept that will not need, that we will not need to use for this scenario? Okay. Well, let's think about this scenario. This is where he is starting on the cliff. So if we draw a little cliff here, okay, and this person is jumping off of this thing here, okay, whatever that cliff is. If they're jumping off of here and they're going this way, then there should be one that we're not going to use. We're not going to use the one that's in the negative. And the main thing is that the negative, or these numbers right here, x-intercepts, are talking about time. So x-intercepts represent time. And we can't have negative time. Okay, so because we can't have negative time, or we can't go back in time, we're not going to be using the negative side of this graph. Okay. All right, so then the next thing I'm going to do now, I don't know where I'm going to put, I'm not finishing my graph yet because I don't know where my x-intercepts are. I guess I could do 1, 1, 2, 4, 3, 9 and try and figure that out here, but I'm actually going to use the back here to help me out. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and rewrite our problem. I'm going to use y instead of h and t. So negative x squared plus 2x plus 8. Okay, so at this time you might want to stop and watch the videos that I posted about completing the square and quadratic formula, or you can go through this with me and then go back and check it. So the first thing I want to do is read the hint here. It says substitute 0 for h of t, which is our y here, and multiply both sides of the equation by -1 before you factor or complete the square. So the hint is basically trying to tell us is that we can't do factoring or completing the square when we have that -1 there. So what we could do is we could either divide it out or multiply both sides by -1 to get rid of it. So essentially we are just changing all of our values. So positive, -2x, and a -8. This is what I'm going to use for all three of these, okay? So once you've factored out that negative, then you can use it for anyone. You could do quadratic formula with this original, or you can change it. It's up to you. All right, so factoring, x squared minus 2x minus 8. So remember, we're going to take this number. We're trying to find two numbers that multiply together to get -8, and at the same time add together to get -2. So my factors of 8 are 1 and 8, and 2 and 4. That's all I got. So I have to figure out what two numbers are going to multiply together. So multiply here, but at the same time add here. So I'm assuming you guys figured it out. It's 2 and 4. So that means I'm going to have positive, see, let me think which one's negative. -4, because I need to add them together to get a -2. So +2 and -4. Now these are my factors, but remember that the whole point is to solve. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set these two equal to 0. And now I'm going to solve. Okay, so there are my two answers. We'll get to completing the square and quadratic formula, but now I can actually go back and do the end of my graphing. -2 and +4. So if I go back to my graphing, -2 is all the way over here. Well, remember we said, -2 is all the way over here. Remember we said that we're not concerned about this side because we're not going back in time. So we care about the 4. Okay, so here now is our graph. Yours will look a little different because it all depends on what your x-intercepts are. Okay, so mine is at +4 and -2. So you will probably have one that you won't use because you're not going back in time. So if you have a negative, you don't want to use that one. Okay, so I'm complete with the front page. Now I'm going to go to the back, and I'm going to finish by doing completing the square and quadratic formula. These two are going to be on the video that I posted earlier. So you can be looking at that. And they should have the same answer. Like I already know what my answers are for these two. So all I want you to do is show me the work to support that. So I'm going to go ahead and put my x squared minus 2x minus 8 equals 0 here. So step 1 for completing the square is to move the constant over and have a space. So x squared minus 2x space equals 8 space. Okay. Next step is I want to basically make this a perfect square trinomial, but at the same time I want to factor it. So here's what I do. I do x, I take that negative and put it here. Half of 2 is 1, and 1 squared is just 1. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides. Okay, so here's what I get. 8 plus 1 is 9. So I'm going to go back and do that one more time. Half of 2 is 1. 1 squared is 1 and 1. So whatever you put in this space, you have to put in this space. So I'm going to get x minus 1 equals, because I'm going to take the square root of both sides to get rid of that 2 there. Those cancel out now. And I'll get plus or minus 3. So that means I'm going to have 2 possible answers. I'm going to do x minus 1 equals positive 3, and x minus 1 equals a negative 3. So then the last thing I do is add 1 to both sides. I get x equals 4. Add 1, and I get x equals negative 2. So again, I got the same exact answers here, just showing it in a different way that I could solve. Okay, so this project is all about how can I figure out some answers in multiple ways. Okay. All right, and then the last one is quadratic formula. So x equals opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead. Again, I'm going to use the same one, just taking out the negative because I might as well just stay consistent. So x equals opposite of b would be positive 2 plus or minus the square root of b squared. B is actually negative, minus 4a and c is negative 8. All over 2a, which is just 1. Okay, lots going on. So there's a lot in those parentheses. So I just plugged in my numbers, and now I'm going to simplify. Keeping in mind, don't forget to do the opposite of b here. So b, I use this one. B is negative 2, that's why it's positive 2. But in here, it stays negative. Okay, so now I'm going to simplify. I'm going to get parentheses, negative 2. Make sure you have your parentheses around there. That will make a difference. Minus 4 times, I'm going to just do negative 8 because times 1 isn't going to make a difference. All right, so that's 36. Okay, so then the next thing I'm going to simplify. Square root of 36 is 6. So step 1 is to do the plus 6. So 2 plus 6 over 2. And the other one is 2 minus 6 over 2. So 6 plus 2 is 8. Divided by 2 would give me 4. And this one here is 2 minus 6 gives me negative 4. Divided by 2 gives me a negative 2. So again, another way, still getting same answers. Yay, that means I'm doing it right. Okay. All right, so the last thing is a story, and I'm going to leave this to you guys. But the important thing about the story is that you have to make sure that you are using all the information that you know. So what I will do is I will say out loud what I would write, something that I would write for mine, okay? So I have to use some important things. I have to know the height of the cliff. I have to know my maximum height in which he jumped into the water, and at what time did he reach that height, and when did he hit the water. Okay, so I'm going to use my graph to help me out with my picture, with my story. So he starts here. So Jason starts at a height of 8 feet. He jumps up into the air and hits his max height of, let's see, that max height was 9, because that's our vertex. So maybe I'll label this. Our max height of 9 feet after 1 second. So that 1 represents the seconds, okay? He stayed in the air and fell to the water. So this is the water, and this is 4,0. So he's at 0 sea level after 4 seconds. So that X is representing the 4. So at 4 seconds, he hits the water, okay? So that would be something like that, just something fairly simple, but it needs to make sure it hits, talks about how high the cliff is, what the max height is, what time did he reach that height, that's your X, and then when did he hit the water, okay? So I know this video was a little long. Thank you for staying with me if you did, and I hope that this helps when you are doing your assignment. So good luck, and I will see you later.